Every neighborhood has a house people avoid eye contact with. In Clearwater Oaks, it sat just past the white fence, Ray Colburn's porch, rocking chair creaking in rhythm with the wind. The morning sun hadn't yet broken through the thick lace of cypress and pine that bordered Baybridge Hollow. Light filtered down like molasses, slow and golden, soaking the dew-damp lawns and the mailbox clusters that lined the sidewalks. The air held the kind of heat that clung to your skin before you'd even had a chance to sweat. September in Louisiana, where summer never fully relinquished its grip. Ray Colburn stirred his coffee with the same slow rhythm as his rocking chair. A rust-colored thermos sat in the crook of his elbow. From his perch, he could see the entire curve of the Hoa's Entry Boulevard, immaculate lawns, identical mailboxes, and, this morning, a set of identical wall flyers flapping in unison. One for every house. His house wasn't like theirs. It stood apart, literally and legally, 6 feet beyond the wall line, perched slightly higher on a bluff where the land dipped toward the bayou. The porch sagged a little. The siding had a few dull patches. And beside the gravel driveway sat a gray FEMA trailer, boxy and unassuming, with a faded sticker on its rear that peeled gently at one corner. Nobody said anything about it, not out loud. A kid on a lime green bike coasted by, slowed down, and nudged his friend. "That's where the weird guy lives," he whispered. Then he pedaled faster. Ray didn't hear it, but he didn't need to. He'd lived long enough to recognize when the world was whispering about you. Behind him, a wind chime clinked lazily against the porch beam. He sipped from the thermos again, eyes narrowing as the breeze flipped one of the wallflyers. From this distance, he could make out the headline: "Maintaining Neighborhood Visual Harmony, Fall Reminders." He snorted quietly, then leaned forward, reaching for the clippers he kept beside the step. One by one, he trimmed the vine that had crept up along the fence post, a wiry thing with thorns like truth-tellers, always returning. He worked slowly, deliberately, like someone who found meaning in finishing small tasks well. At 8 a.m., he found a folded paper under his doormat. It was printed on ivory cardstock and smelled faintly of lavender. No envelope, just sharp black text in a bold serif font. Unapproved utility storage detected. Section 4.3 Visual Consistency Zone Guidelines. Ray turned the card over. Blank. He folded it again and slid it into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt. Just before 10, Darrell Wynn showed up carrying a pie. He wore a straw hat, old slacks, and a button-up that had seen one too many summers, but the warmth in his voice never faded. "Morning, Ray." "Morning, Darrell." "Clara made too much again," Darrell said, lifting the tin like an offering. "She said this one's pecan, but the crust got experimental." Ray accepted it with both hands, nodding once in thanks. Darrell lingered. "That trailer, she still stocked?" Ray didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted toward the silver box beside the driveway. "Rotated last month. Propane's clean. Solar panels patched." Darrell nodded back. "Just checking. That thing saved 2 families the year the levy gave." Ray gave a quiet hum. "She's still good." Darrell turned to go, then paused. "Judith came by yesterday. You get one of those wallflyers?" "I did. She's making rounds. Says she wants everything tidy for the fall festival." Ray's lips curled, barely. "She want to rake the bayou next?" Darrell chuckled, then waved as he made his way back down the drive, shoes crunching through gravel and fallen pine needles. The afternoon wore on without incident. The sun baked the sidewalk and the WA bulletin board by the clubhouse, which now had a second flyer pinned beneath the first: upcoming tree trimming protocols. Volunteer or violation. The usual cluster of residents gathered by the mailboxes, discussing leaf height, squirrel feeders, and the fact that Sandra's Halloween decorations had gone up, just a little early. At twilight, Judith appeared. She came as she always did. Visor white, clipboard under her arm, steps precise. Her heels made a sharp rhythm against the sidewalk, tap, 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 like a gavel striking wood. When she passed Marty's yard, she adjusted the angle of a wind spinner. At the corner near the Jacobs fence, she straightened a plastic flamingo that was leaning too far forward. And then she reached Ray's fence. She stopped, squared her shoulders, and scanned the trailer. Her lips pressed into a line. She didn't open her clipboard, but her fingers tapped on its surface as if reading something only she could see. The porch creaked as Ray leaned slightly forward in his chair. He didn't wave. "That trailer doesn't quite fit our neighborhood character, don't you think?" she said. Her voice was calm, but edged with something bright and sharp, like lemon on a cut. Ray didn't blink. The wind shifted. A pinecone tumbled from the gutter, landing on the step. "I think it fits the storm season just fine, ma'am." He nods at the sky. Thunder rumbles faintly. In Baybridge Hollow, lawn height was debated like national policy. But a FEMA contract? That was above everyone's pay grade, except Ray's. The morning light filtered through the warped glass of Ray Colburn's workshop window, making the dust in the air look like it shimmered. He stood at the back workbench, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a cup of black coffee perched on the edge beside a small transistor radio playing an old Willie Nelson tune. In front of him lay a stack of manila folders, each one labeled in tidy block print. One in particular bore a slightly faded red stamp: FEMA, Emergency Storage Compliance 2020 to 2025. Ray opened it slowly, thumbing through laminated checklists, printed emails, and receipts. On a legal pad, he wrote, "Inventory Audit, October 9th, underlining the date twice." The propane levels were good. Water barrels rotated. Batteries tested last week. But the dashcam? That hadn't been checked in a while. He glanced toward the trailer outside, its aluminum siding glinting under the morning sun. A slow breath, a sip of lukewarm coffee, and then a few more notes jotted down in that same even handwriting. Later that morning, Sandra Kaplan opened her sunroom to the wallboard. The room smelled like lemon polish and faint desperation. She'd arranged folding chairs in a half-circle, added a plate of sugar cookies she'd meant to save for her grandchildren, and lit a pumpkin-scented candle because it felt like the right thing to do. Judith arrived precisely at 10, clipboard under one arm, a folder marked Beautification Campaign in the other. Marty trailed behind her, slightly out of breath, clutching 2 pens and a spiral notebook he rarely opened. "I move we begin," Judith said crisply, before anyone else could speak. Sandra hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." Judith clicked a pen with the finality of a judge swinging a gavel. "I've prepared a draft for a new community initiative, Visual Harmony Week. It's about standards, pride, reinvestment in the image we present." She passed out glossy handouts featuring ideal lawn heights, examples of approved decor, and in the centerfold, a photo taken from across the street of Ray's gray trailer, blurred slightly at the edges like a ghost someone hoped would vanish if no one focused too hard. Marty leaned in. "Technically, he's not within WA bounds, right?" Judith didn't flinch. "But he's visible from within. And visible is impactful." Sandra glanced around the room. "What are you proposing?" "A formal notice," Judith said, crisp and certain. "A documented request for corrective action. Nothing litigious, just educational." The vote passed 3-1. Sandra was the only no, and even that came with a shrug. By mid-afternoon, Ray had the letter in hand. Delivered not by mail but tucked beneath the rubber band on his gate latch, folded into a plastic sleeve to protect it from dew. Notice of visual disruption. As part of our shared commitment to neighborhood excellence, we respectfully ask that all residents maintain harmony in the visibility of their property from community spaces. Clearwater Oaks WA Beautification Committee. Ray read the letter twice, expression unreadable. Then he folded it neatly, placed it beside the FEMA paperwork, and muttered, "They really don't know what they're dealing with." He drove into town after that, parked 2 blocks down from Lou's Diner, and walked the rest of the way. The screen door let out a sharp squeak as he entered. Marla, the longtime waitress with a braid and a sixth sense for moods, was already pouring him a cup before he'd picked a seat. "Morning, honey," she said, placing the coffee down without asking. "You look like a man in need of eggs and quiet." "I'll take both," Ray said, voice low. He sat near the window. The same booth he always chose. Same view of the feed store across the street. Same faded Coca-Cola clock ticking away at the wrong time. A man at the counter, mid-40s with sunglasses propped on his head, called over loud enough for the whole diner to hear, "Hey Colburn, still got that zombie trailer parked out back?" A couple of chuckles. Marla didn't laugh. Ray didn't even glance up. He took a sip of coffee and resumed unfolding the newspaper. The moment passed. That night, the crickets returned to their chorus, and the air grew thick with moisture again. Ray stepped out to the trailer with a roll of waterproof tape and a small camera unit no larger than a fist. He knelt beside the hitch, installed the dashcam, and angled it to catch any vehicle approaching from the service road. With a steady hand, he smoothed a laminated label beneath the lens. Property of FEMA. Asset number 472A. He stood back, hands on his hips, and looked out at the neighborhood beyond the fence, rows of porches, all dark except for Judith's, where a soft glow flickered behind the curtains. Back inside her home, Judith typed with mechanical precision. The email subject line read, Neighborhood Cleanup Initiative, Community Reminder. Her fingers paused before typing the body. Let's clean up our community, inside and out. A blurry photo of Ray's trailer is attached. It took 6 years of silence for Ray to react. It only took 6 hours for Judith to make the biggest mistake of her presidency. The morning light was soft and gray, filtered through the low haze that hung over Baybridge Hollow like a wet blanket. Ray stepped outside with his usual ceramic mug, steam curling from its brim. The porch creaked as it always did under his weight. He took 2 steps down the walkway, boots pressing into the gravel path, and then stopped cold. The trailer was gone. Where the FEMA unit had sat for years was now a bare patch of stone, indented and streaked with fresh tire marks. The weeds that usually curled beneath its wheels now stood exposed, flattened like they'd been steamrolled. Ray didn't speak. He didn't frown. He simply sipped from his mug, took one long breath, and turned on his heel back toward the barn. Inside, the air smelled like machine oil and cedar dust. He flipped the light on with a cord pull and crossed to the side workbench. There, taped to the wall just below a calendar of the 1995 LSU Tigers, was a sheet of letterhead he hadn't noticed yesterday. Notice. WA Removal of Abandoned Object. Safety Oversight, Section 3.2. Ray read it twice. The print was neat, maybe even smug in tone, as if designed by someone who thought font choice could replace due process. He opened his laptop. It whirred a bit before coming to life. Ray clicked through folders with labels like Storm Cycle Logs, Winter Propane, and finally, Trailer Cam. The most recent file was timestamped 3:04 a.m. The grainy footage came into view, first darkness, then headlights swinging into frame. A tow truck reversed into the lot. A figure emerged from the shadows, gesturing toward the trailer hitch. Ray paused, rewound, zoomed. There she was, Judith Ellerman, wearing a reflective vest and holding a clipboard like a badge of courage. She was pointing, left arm extended, lips moving, but it was the audio that sealed it. This will show him who runs this neighborhood. Ray clicked save. Then he opened a new email. 2. Lansing.o@fema-south.gov. Subject. Unauthorized tow of registered FEMA unit. Attached. Dashcam footage, removal notice, FEMA asset documentation. He hit send. At 9:42 a.m., his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Colburn, he answered. Ray, it's Cole. Got something strange on my desk this morning. Says someone filed a state-level interference report involving a piece of federal equipment. That yours? It is. You know the equipment's active? I do. Cole gave a low whistle. Then it ain't just strange. It's dumb. Ray didn't reply. By midday, FEMA compliance officer Lansing emailed back. They were initiating formal inquiry protocol under Emergency Deployment Clause 4B. Ray printed the email and pinned it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a fishing lure. Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, the WA group chat was cracking under pressure. Screenshots passed from phone to phone. One showing Judith posing near the tow truck, another of Sandra's hesitant reply. Are we sure this was authorized? At 3 p.m., Daryl showed up at Ray's gate, holding a square of aluminum foil. Pecan cornbread, he said. Figured you could use something steady. Ray took the bundle and nodded toward the porch. Appreciate it. Daryl didn't sit, just stood watching the sky. Group chat's a mess. Judith says it was a routine enforcement. Sandra's not buying it. Someone sent the dashcam footage to Marty. Whole board's on edge. Ray peeled back the foil and broke off a corner of the bread. Good. Daryl squinted. You planning something? Ray didn't answer. He rarely did. By dusk, a hush fell over Clearwater Oaks. The sprinklers kicked on in synchronized intervals. Porch lights glowed behind gauzy curtains. Judith's house sat pristine as ever, hydrangeas trimmed, shutters painted, driveway spotless. But her blinds were drawn. Down the road, A pair of headlights turned onto the lane. A black SUV rolled to a stop in front of Judith's house. The passenger door opened. A man stepped out wearing a navy windbreaker and holding a clipboard tucked under his arm. His shoes crunched on the walkway as he approached the door. He didn't knock right away. Inside, behind the slats of her blinds, Judith stood perfectly still. A government SUV pulls into Judith's driveway. A man in a windbreaker steps out holding a clipboard. Judith peers through the blinds. Some people break down when they realize they're wrong. Others double down. Judith Ellerman was very much the latter. From the outside, her home still looked like a catalog photograph, white trim gleaming, curtains pressed, lawn cut to regulation height. But inside, the energy had shifted. Judith sat stiffly on the edge of her floral-upholstered armchair, one foot tapping an erratic rhythm against the hardwood floor. The morning sun crept through lace curtains and landed on her sideboard, casting long shadows over a collection of ceramic hummingbirds. They looked as frozen as she did. She was dressed for control, pearl earrings, silk blouse, gold watch ticking too loud. On the coffee table before her sat a fresh manila envelope, unsealed. FEMA compliance officer Lansing didn't sit. He stood by the edge of the rug, clipboard in hand, shoes damp from the dew outside. He kept his tone even, as if reading from a weather report. "Ms. Ellerman, we're confirming the trailer was towed under your direction?" Judith kept her hands folded. "The community has visual standards. This was a disruption. I acted under the authority granted by our charter." Lansing lifted an eyebrow. "You're aware that the unit in question is part of an active federal emergency deployment inventory?" She smiled tightly. "It was unsightly, and within our line of sight. That falls under visual integrity. Section 5.1. Lansing jotted something, then glanced at the small vase of roses on her mantel. Federal law supersedes WA preferences. The clipboard snapped closed. That afternoon, the WA board received a certified letter stamped in blue. It arrived with no fanfare, just a firm knock at the clubhouse door from a courier in khakis. The envelope bore FEMA's seal and 2 clipped pages inside. Notification of interference investigation, emergency acid deployment violation. It was addressed to Clearwater Oaks Homeowners Association and cited specific dates, GPS data, dashcam footage, and the now infamous email line. "This will set a community standard." Sandra read it aloud. The room fell silent. Even Marty looked down at his hands. Judith stood at the front, flanked by her clipboard and a half-empty coffee thermos. "I understand this is concerning," she said evenly. "But let's not overreact. FEMA will see this for what it was, a misunderstanding." Marty cleared his throat. "You didn't tell us you were ordering a tow." Judith's smile thinned. "Some of us are leaders. Some are followers." Sandra blinked. "Is that how we're doing things now?" Judith didn't respond. She adjusted a paperweight on the table, unnecessary, since there was no breeze, and tapped her clipboard twice. Across the neighborhood, Ray was changing the water barrels. One of the FEMA requirements for his contract was rotation every 30 days. He worked quietly under a soft canopy of pine limbs, measuring levels, tightening caps. His porch radio murmured classic country, and on the fence post closest to the road, he nailed a new paper. Informational notice. To all residents of Clearwater Oaks. The trailer previously removed from Mr. Colburn's property is a federally registered emergency response asset. It is not abandoned, and it is not in violation. Please direct all questions to FEMA Region 6. Office of Emergency Deployment Compliance. The flyer was signed, dated, and laminated. Darrell passed by just as Ray finished pinning it. "Looks official," he said. "It is," Ray answered. Darrell hesitated. "She's not taking this well." Ray didn't reply. He never gloated, but he folded the hammer back into his canvas pouch and turned back toward the house without another word. By dusk, there were changes. Subtle, but clear. Neighbors began slowing near Ray's fence. One man in a track jacket gave a wave. A woman walking her dog offered a quiet evening. No one lingered, but the temperature of the street had changed. Less suspicion, more curiosity. Ray noticed, but didn't show it. Judith, meanwhile, hadn't left her house since noon. From her living room, she could see the new flyer on Ray's fence, bold against the dull grain of wood. Her jaw clenched. She pulled her phone from the charger, thumb trembling slightly as she opened the WA app. No new messages. No new votes. Just silence. She stepped outside in her slippers, the air thick with stillness. The neighborhood was dark but not asleep. Lights on behind closed windows, televisions flickering, whispers behind curtains. She paced the driveway slowly, back and forth, phone to her ear. No one answered. No, they can't do this to me. When Daryl lit the grill that Saturday, it smelled like unity and brisket. And for the first time in weeks, people laughed near Ray's yard. The smoke drifted over the split rail fences and between the porch swings, curling past sun-faded shutters and small American flags still hanging from Memorial Day. In Daryl Wynn's backyard, folding chairs were planted like crops around picnic tables, and a metal tub of sweet tea clinked with ice as neighbors scooped out El Adleffels into red plastic cups. Someone had draped a gingham tablecloth across the potluck table, now sagging under bowls of slaw, casseroles, and at least 3 varieties of deviled eggs. Ray arrived just after noon. He wasn't the first, but he got a few second glances. He carried a cast iron pan wrapped in a dish towel, cornbread, still warm, and a quiet nod for anyone who caught his eye. Daryl met him at the side gate, already wearing an apron that read, "I like my pork pulled." "Glad you came," he said, slapping Ray lightly on the shoulder. Ray passed him the pan. "Didn't want Clarice's recipe to go to waste. Looks like you brought half the reason folks showed up." People didn't flock to Ray. They didn't crowd him, but they made room. A man from 3 houses down offered him a seat near the fire pit. Sandra brought him a glass of sweet tea with a slice of lemon. A few nodded as they passed. The air wasn't cleared, exactly, but it had changed. Kids darted through the lawn with paper streamers. 2 teens played cornhole under the oak. Cicadas hummed like background music, and every so often, someone refilled the brisket tray with practiced precision. Judith stood behind her living room curtain and watched. The new WA Bulletin, Fall Beautification Guidelines Revised, remained unopened on most doorsteps. A couple were being used as makeshift fans. One was torn in half and lined a trash bin beside the cooler. She smoothed the front of her blouse and adjusted the pearl clip in her hair. Then, after a long pause, she stepped outside, holding a glass tray of carefully arranged fruit skewers. She walked the long way around, through the side yard, appearing not from her porch but from the sidewalk like a guest who just happened to be nearby. Her heels clicked over the stepping stones. Her smile was tight. "Smells amazing," she said, raising her voice slightly as she approached. "What a lovely turnout." A few heads turned, a couple of polite nods. Daryl offered a faint wave but didn't leave the grill. Judith placed the fruit tray on a table, made small talk with a retired couple for 2 minutes, then walked over to where Sandra and Ray were standing beside the trellis. "I think it's important," she began, "that we remember why these gatherings matter. Unity, harmony. Is the trailer coming back?" someone asked. A middle-aged man with a baseball cap and a plate of beans, standing just close enough to be heard. Judith blinked. Ray didn't answer. He smiled, took a sip of tea, and looked toward the hedgerow. Later, Sandra tapped Ray's elbow and motioned toward the side gate. They walked in silence around the edge of his property, past the rain barrel and the faded garden hose curled like a sleeping snake. "I shouldn't ask," Sandra said gently, "but, can I see it?" Ray nodded once. He led her into the barn and opened the file drawer that held his FEMA paperwork. The documents were laminated, clipped, and organized. The contract bore a federal seal. Sandra read it slowly. "This is real," she whispered. Ray didn't reply. When she looked up, her eyes were softer. Back at the cookout, people had started to migrate toward the tables again. Someone brought out a guitar. Daryl passed around slices of Ray's cornbread, calling it storm bread with a wink. Judith stayed for another 15 minutes, hovering between groups, trying to find an opening for a speech that never came. Eventually, she picked up her untouched fruit tray and walked home. The sun was dipping behind the pines when she reached her front step. Her porch light had flickered on automatically. As she bent down to unlock the door, she noticed something wedged under the welcome mat, a piece of lined notebook paper, folded in half. It wasn't signed, just a few words written in blocky pen. "This isn't leadership, it's theater." Ray didn't like paperwork, but if he had to sign one more affidavit just to keep a trailer parked, he'd do it with extra ink. His kitchen table had vanished beneath a sprawl of folders, most of them marked with FEMA headers and clipped in neat sections. The one on top read, FEMA, Incident Response Protocol, Suburban Interference Tier 2. Next to it, a fountain pen with a brass nib weighted like a gavel. Ray adjusted his reading glasses, signed another form, and sipped lukewarm coffee as the ink dried. Out on the porch, cicadas buzzed without urgency. The late October air had lost its summer weight, leaving behind a lightness that made the wind feel more like a whisper than a shove. Meanwhile, across town at the Baybridge Hollow Courthouse Annex, Judith Ellerman sat across from a man who looked barely old enough to rent a car. Tanner Culpepper-esque. Wore a slim-cut suit, spoke in confident bursts, and had an email signature with 3 degrees and 2 logos. "We'll argue community standards," he said, tapping the screen of his tablet. "Visual harassment, psychological degradation of space." Judith nodded tightly. "Make it firm, not hostile, but decisive." That afternoon, Ray received a hand-delivered envelope with the courthouse seal pressed into the flap. Deputy Cole walked up the gravel drive with a smirk barely hidden under his mustache. "Afternoon," he said, handing the envelope over. Ray took it. "Busy day?" Cole tilted his head. "Judith's making it one." Ray raised an eyebrow. "You read it?" "Didn't have to," Cole said. "Judge Walters already called down. Said, and I quote, 'Tell Ray not to lose sleep over it.'" Ray didn't respond. He only tipped his head and turned back to the porch. By 4 p.m., the case had landed on Judge Walters' desk. The judge was older than the courthouse paint and had a coffee mug that said "Retire me already" in Sharpie. He flipped through the complaint without removing his reading glasses, paused at the claim of emotional disruption via unauthorized aesthetic, and closed the folder. He scribbled 3 words in blue ink. Dismissed. Lack merit. 5 minutes later, Judith received an email from the clerk's office. 10 minutes after that, her lawyer emailed, "We are not aligned on long-term strategy. I'll be withdrawing as counsel." At 6:15 p.m., the WA group chat pinged to life with a series of passive emojis and quiet observations. "Wait, we sued Ray? Is this why our legal budget is at zero? Did FEMA reply yet?" Sandra typed one line. "We need to talk." Judith didn't reply. Out on his porch, Ray folded a lawn chair with practiced ease and carried it back into the barn. As he passed the gate, he noticed an envelope tucked into the slats. No return address, just neat print. "Mr. Colburn, we'd be honored if you'd speak at next week's community preparedness session. The clubhouse is available. Refreshments provided." The signature at the bottom was Daryl's. Ray stared at it for a moment, then placed it on top of the FEMA folder, perfectly aligned. Night fell quietly. At Judith's house, the lights were on, but the curtains remained closed. She sat at her desk, the laptop glow casting long shadows across her face. Her email inbox blinked with unread replies. She opened her signature settings, scrolled down to Judith Ellerman, President, Clearwater Oaks WA. She clicked the cursor at the end of the line. Paused. Backspaced. Letter by letter, her title vanished. That evening, Judith deletes her WA president signature from her email footer. But she doesn't tell anyone. You can block a driveway. You can call a tow truck. But you can't outrun a property line, not when Ray Colburn owns the road. The early light broke clean over Baybridge Hollow, catching on dew-drenched grass and making the gravel shimmer like silver coins. A small county crew in orange vests stood at the head of the road that wound from the main road toward Clearwater Oaks. One man leveled a post-hole digger. Another opened the back of a truck and pulled out a green sign with white lettering. FEMA access lane, private use only, entry by permit. Ray stood a few feet back, clipboard in hand, watching without hurry. The signature he'd inked at the county office 2 weeks earlier had finalized everything. The old road, once assumed to be public by the WA, was now formally designated as a private agricultural lane, protected under zoning subsection 9C. It was quiet, permanent, and perfectly legal. Down the way, Judith stood on her porch in a navy windbreaker, phone clutched in one hand, lips pressed into a line so thin it might have vanished entirely. Her shoes were clean, her face composed, but her energy vibrated just beneath the surface, like glass before a crack forms. Ray hadn't said anything to her. He didn't have to. By mid-morning, a flyer had been taped to every mailbox in the subdivision, printed on autumn-themed paper, complete with clip art leaves. Clearwater Oaks Autumn Walk, Saturday, 3 p.m. Join your neighbors in celebrating community, color, and cheer. Meet at the gate. No one said it, but everyone knew it was Judith's last stand. At 2:58, she stood by the new gate, clipboard in hand, wearing a carefully selected scarf and a hint of perfume. A few families trickled out. Steve from zoning with his wife, the Millers with their baby stroller, Daryl with a fold-up chair slung over one shoulder. But as they approached the gate, they paused. The new sign stood firm, mounted into fresh gravel and framed by two modest flower planters someone, possibly Sandra, had added overnight. Ray wasn't there, but his name was. Access managed by R. Colburn, property manager, Baybridge Hollow Ag Use Authority. Marty walked up beside Judith and frowned. Did you get a permit? It's a walking event, she snapped. Still says, entry by permit. You got one? She glared at him, then at the sign, then at the cluster of neighbors watching politely from a distance. I'm calling the county. She did. 20 minutes later, Judith stood inside the zoning office, arms folded, toe tapping against the linoleum floor. Steve, now back in his official capacity, looked over his glasses. Judith, the lane's designation is locked. There was a public notice, a 2-week objection period, and you never responded. I didn't think he'd actually go through with it. Steve shrugged. He did. It's his road now. Judith's voice faltered. But, we've always used it. And now you use it by permission. He leaned forward gently. Or you don't. No shouting. No gavel. Just bureaucracy doing what it does best. Closing doors with a quiet click. That evening, cars returned the long way around. Families adjusted. A few kids kicked pebbles down the alternate route, mildly annoyed but not enough to care. No one mentioned the walk. No one complained. The wah chat went silent. Judith's SUV crept down the lane just before sunset. She hadn't been at the office. She hadn't spoken to the board. The wind was still. The air smelled like pine sap and old paper. As she turned the corner toward the neighborhood entrance, the final insult revealed itself. There, perched on a post just beside the new gate, stood a mailbox. It was shaped like a miniature FEMA trailer, silver siding, tiny red flag, and 2 black wheels crafted in detail. Below it, a plaque. Official drop. FEMA access lane. Installed by County Maintenance, October 30th. Judith drove home in silence. A mailbox shaped like a miniature FEMA trailer now sits proudly at the neighborhood entrance, installed with full county blessing. Some battles end with banners. Others with resignation forms and a moving truck. Judith's ended with neither, just silence. The fall air carried a mild sweetness that made everything in Clearwater Oaks feel gentler than it was a month ago. Folding tables dotted the cul-de-sac beside the clubhouse, lined with bowls of chili, trays of cornbread, crock-pots of gumbo, and enough sweet tea to flood a football field. It was the HOA's first ever storm preparedness potluck, and the parking lot was full. Children darted between lawn chairs, tracing loops with pinwheels. Someone strummed an acoustic guitar near the trellis. Laughter drifted lazily across the crowd like barbecue smoke, mixing with the smell of hickory brisket and the faint sting of citronella candles. Ray Colburn stood beside a laminated checklist labeled Household Emergency Readiness, passing copies to anyone who asked. He wore his clean flannel, the sleeves rolled just enough to reveal a watch tan, and a small FEMA pin tucked near his collar. He didn't speak loudly, but people leaned in when he did. Daryl, now officially the HOA's interim president, grinned as he passed out name tags. He's the quiet kind of hero, he told a new couple from Maple Lane. The kind with propane. The local sheriff stopped by to shake Ray's hand. So did the fire captain. Even the FEMA regional rep, Lansing, had made the trip. He offered a nod and a cup of hot cider. Thank you, he said simply, for handling it your way. Someone brought out a cake shaped like a generator. Someone else set up a little game booth where kids could build an emergency kit from plastic parts and win glow sticks. But the biggest surprise came after sundown. As the guitar fell silent and people sipped the last of the sweet tea, Steve from the zoning office cleared his throat and motioned for quiet. We've got a little gift for Mr. Colburn, he said, holding up a small box. Something the community put together. He opened the lid to reveal a miniature mailbox, hand-painted in silver, shaped like a FEMA trailer. complete with tiny wheels and a pop-up red flag. "We got permission to place it near the lane," Steve added, with a sign. "FEMA access lane, mail stop. Hope you don't mind." Ray's eyes flicked toward Daryl, then the neighbors gathered in a wide, respectful circle. "I don't mind," he said. Across town, Judith's house sat quiet. The curtains were drawn, no flyers had gone out, no farewell announcement, just a for sale sign staked in the front yard, no balloons, no open house. The photos online showed empty rooms and vague captions. "Private showings by appointment only." The moving truck arrived the next morning. She packed it herself, no helpers, no neighbors watching. The sun was just beginning to warm the dew off the mailbox when she stepped into the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap. From his porch, Ray sipped his coffee and watched the truck approach the gate. It paused. Then, after a short delay, the arm lifted automatically. The driver had submitted paperwork, registered the route. Everything was in order. Judith's SUV followed behind. But the gate stopped. It closed just after the truck cleared, leaving her idling in silence. She waited. Then, slowly, she turned the wheel and followed the long gravel route skirting the subdivision, the one not paved, not polished, and not meant for daily use. The road dipped near the old creek, then climbed toward the county shoulder. As she passed the sign, "FEMA access lane," she looked away. No one waved. The clubhouse lawn was full again. People were trimming hedges, walking dogs, hauling folding chairs. Life had continued, and no one had paused to mark her departure. On Ray's porch, the wind lifted slightly. A row of sunflowers bowed toward the mailbox, their yellow heads catching the last orange blush of sunlight. Ray leans back in his chair, sips his coffee, and watches the wind move through a row of sunflowers he planted behind the mailbox. On a quiet road renamed for what was once misunderstood, neighbors gathered, not to protest, but to prepare, shoulder to shoulder, under soft lamplight and falling leaves. What began as a one-man standoff became a quiet revolution, reminding them that authority means nothing without responsibility, and rules lose their value when used to punish rather than protect. Sometimes, all it takes is one calm voice, one steady act, to remind a community who it really belongs to. When the wind shifts and the sunflowers lean, maybe it's time to ask ourselves, are we guarding the neighborhood, or just guarding power? Because in the end, a road can lead out, or lead home.